Okay, we'll be waiting for a couple people to join here. We're going to give it just a sec, and then we'll get started with everybody. All right, while people start to join, thank you for everyone who has decided to join our webinar today. We appreciate you taking some time this afternoon. Thomas is pretty excited for the presentation he put together. I see some people starting to join on the live, which is great. Welcome. All right, so for everyone who is not aware, we are part of the Independent Musicians Guild, and we are a business nonprofit that is meant to help business owners that are basically musicians to own their business, right? Musicians and independent musicians they don't realize it a lot of times, but they're business owners, right? And we have to make sure that as a business owner, as an independent musician, you're setting yourself goals, you're setting out a vision for your product, for your brand, and that could be a lot of different things. And so Thomas put together a really great deck that we wanted to go over with you guys, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll be kind of monitoring the chat for Thomas. And then if you have anything you want to dig in deeper, we can always take this offline after session. But otherwise, please enjoy our session, our building vision and setting goals with Thomas Crawford.
So thanks, Bryan. So thank you all for joining. All right. So again, thank you all for joining. I'm Thomas Crawford. I'm the founder of Independent Musicians Guild and the founder of DarkStream Music Management. It is my boutique, kind of bespoke artist development, artist management company that I started last summer. Aside from that, I also have 30 plus years in the music industry in some fashion or another. Currently, I'm the singer and songwriter for my new band, Eistabus. Previously, I was the guitar player for Fleischkrieg. And then during my music experience, I also worked over 18 years in the tech industry, predominantly with Amazon and Tinder. And I left the tech industry about 2 to 3 years ago to kind of start taking all of my experiences from tech and kind of putting them into the music industry. So this is my presentation / webinar related to building vision and setting goals for your music. So just to get started, what is a vision statement? So in essence, the clinical term, a vision statement, is a concise, inspiring declaration of what an organization, a team, or an individual aspires to achieve in their future. In this case, it's your music, your band, your art, and ultimately it is your destination. So thinking of it like when you go on vacation. When you decide to go on vacation, you don't just hop in your car and start driving. You have an ideal destination in mind when you're going. So kind of think of your vision statement as that. You know, if you think of it from a vacation standpoint, my vision statement is I aspire to go to Mexico for a week and spend time with my toes in the sand. You know, that's kind of liking it to that analogy, but flipping that into an actual like long-term vision for what you're wanting to do with your music. So when thinking of this more and more and going a little bit or going back just a little bit, a lot of times when I've talked with bands or start interviewing them on like what they're wanting to do with their music, I always ask them like, what are you wanting to do? Like, where do you see yourself? And they're usually they come up with, well, my next step is I'm gonna play some out of town shows, or I'm gonna record an album. And I always stop. I'm like, no. Ultimately, what is your long-term vision? What are you wanting to? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 20 years? And a lot of them kind of take a step back and they never really thought of it that way. They just see what other people are doing and they kind of think that that's their vision, but they always just look at it as what's in front of them rather than what lies down the horizon. So when you decide you're wanting to start doing your vision, sit down and reflect on your artistic identity. How do you want people to see your music, in 10 to 20 years? What do you see as like your creative legacy? Thinking of it from an observer or an audience or a fan standpoint, what do you want them to say about you and your band? And sit down and really reflect and kind of put those things, jot those things down into place, and then collaborate with your band members. I'm going over this very much at a high level. I have worksheets and I have more step-by-step guides on how to craft it. But ultimately, you're wanting to start with this. You put those things down, and then collaborate with band members or trusted people within your quote-unquote team. Be it your spouse, your partner, a really good friend. Just kind of share with them on like what you're thinking and kind of ideate it out, and then write out your single statement and digest it for a little bit. Spend a little bit of time thinking on it and set it down for like a week, and then come back the next week and go, does this still resonate? Does this still ring true for, how I see myself in the next, 20 years? And then also it's okay after a period of time to revisit it. Sometimes as you grow over a period of time, you start realizing certain things may or may not matter, or there may be more important things that kind of evolve to it. But ultimately, you do want to have like one particular statement for a solid period of time to help be your North Star going forward. And here's kind of like an example of a vision statement. So, for instance, we aim to craft timeless melodies and lyrics that spark joy, reflection, and a sense of belonging for audiences worldwide. This is a very generic one, but you can kind of use it as an example. So I'm going to share something here. Sorry, let me grab this. And I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. All right. And this is kind of a template, if you will. So you can grab this from the chat if you would like. And, like I said, it's a template. It's very generic. And I'm going to show you another example of one of the bands that I'm working with out of Cincinnati, Ohio, a band called Oasis. I helped them craft their vision statement, and I'll show that a little bit later in the presentation. But you can kind of use this as an initial guide or template for what you're to crafting that vision. And give me just a second to go back to the presentation again.
A little better.
Little better, little better. So there we go. So once you have built your vision statement, like that's a lot of the first bit of hard work. Once you have that, you want to work backwards. This is a common thing that I learned in my time in tech. We would always set out these long-term visions of what we wanted to do as a team, as an organization, and we would see what that was, and then we would work backwards from that to where we are today. And basically looking at each milestone. So, like for instance, if your ultimate vision is I want to be a multi-platinum, world famous band, getting these awards, you start with that and go, okay, well, in order to do that, what do I have to do before then? Well, I need to at least get, some level of notoriety or presence, within the continent. Before that, I need to get some notoriety within my country, and then going backwards within my state, and keep going back from there, and ultimately come to where you are today. And in that way, that is liking it to you're on your vacation. You go backwards like, okay, I want to be in Mexico. What do I need to do before I go to Mexico? Well, I need to book travel and book, hotels. Okay, I book my hotel, I book my flights, Okay, and what do I need to, before that? Well, I may need to get a passport. Okay, you go and get your passport. So you kind of see where you work backwards from there to figure out what are the milestones you need to do in order to get to your final destination. Same way as it is with your art and your music. And then once you get to wherever your current state is, you want to set your first year's goals. Like you want to set out to go, okay, this is where we at. These are the milestones I need to hit. My next big milestone, I want to hit this within a year. And you take that year and you want to create goals for it. Uh, and what we an effective goal setting method is something we refer to as SMART goals. Some of you may have heard this before, but SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So sometimes, people may be very generic of like, yeah, I want to, I want to be the biggest band in the world, within a year. It's okay. What does that mean? So being a lot more specific in, hey, at the end of this year, I want to accomplish this thing, and I'm able to measure in some fashion that I've completed this particular item. Is it achievable? So being the greatest band in the world after a year, probably not achievable. So thinking about what is possible within a year, like, hey, I might be the biggest band in my state within a year. Um, and then relevant. So making sure that it aligns with your vision. So that's the other real important part about the vision statement. As I said earlier, it's your North Star. So anything that you do, any goals, any initiatives, any opportunities, you want to reflect, is this in line with my vision? And if it's not, then you want to take a step back and politely decline the opportunity or pass on doing that particular initiative. Um, and if you find yourself, constantly coming up with these initiatives or goals or things that are not aligning with your vision, then that may be an indicator you need to take a step back and revisit your vision. But otherwise, if it's not in line with that, then pass up working on that, spending the effort toward that particular thing. And then lastly, time bound, putting a very specific deadline to that goal that you hold yourself accountable to. And then with your, when you're working backwards and thinking about that, start with, like I said, start with your first major milestone. Come up with 2 to 5 SMART goals related to that milestone. So like if we go back to the, hey, the generic, we want to be the biggest, the biggest band in our state. Okay, uh, what number or what particular aspects to that prove you're the biggest band in your state? What particular metrics are you using? Are you saying specifically on social media? Are you talking about streaming? Are you talking about show attendance? Um, and really kind of break down what the different aspects that contribute to those goals to meet that milestone within the first year. So some of your goals may be within the first year is you really want to focus on your social media and internet presence. You want to focus on your streaming numbers, your views on YouTube for your videos, and shows. So those could be 3 particular goals for you to work on for that first year. Is one is very specific on online presence, and one is particular to streaming. One is particular to show attendance. And then make sure to challenge yourself um, and really push what you think is possible. But these things should also bring you excitement. So you don't want to look at these goals with dread of like, oh, I don't, this doesn't excite me, or I don't think this is going to work. You want to make sure that your goals are challenging and exciting, and ultimately they align with your vision. Once you have set your first year goals, then you want to break that down into quarterly goals and quarterly initiatives. Um, so there's a common practice in business referred to as OKRs. OKRs stands for objectives and key results. So your objective is, going back to uh, the three goals that we just talked about being the biggest band in your state. So like we want to improve the objective would be we want stronger show attendance. We want stronger streaming numbers, stronger internet presence. That's the objective. Your key result is going to be the measurable data to prove that you met that objective. So we want to improve our show presence. So your objective is we want to improve the show present or the amount of show attendance. The key result is sell out three shows, in three different cities. Like that's a very tangible, specific, and measurable result. So going back into these quarters, here's also a little bit more about OKRs and how they're helpful and relevant. This is a concept I want to say it was introduced by the Intel group many decades ago, and also with Google, where a lot of people they will focus on annual goals, and they'll set those goals, and then they'll get really excited at the beginning. They forget about them in the middle, and then it comes time to those deadlines, and they start rushing to try to figure out how to meet those goals, or they'll like move the goalpost a little bit. They'll change the what the measure or the ultimate measurement is for that goal. And a lot of times those annual goal processes kind of fail. But what they've found is if you create these quarterly OKR type of model in conjunction with your annual goals, it puts a compressed timeline on it, more pressure, and you end up you're more likely to meet or exceed those annual goals based off of the effort that you're putting in the quarter. So start with, so you've got like we said, we've got three goals: being the biggest band in your state, focusing on show attendance, streaming numbers, internet presence. So you want to create OKRs for each of those and putting your specific measurements, and you want to set your goalpost for your OKRs to be at least 1/3 to 50% of the actual annual goal that it's tied to. And again, the reason being is you want to push yourself to do more than you thought possible. You want to. There's a thing I wanted to share here. When you're doing those, you want to think of something called a BHAG. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. And what that does in conjunction with trying to set your 33 to 50 is it really challenges you to think what you ever thought was possible. The example that was shared with me is this concept was introduced to Google when they were first working on their Chrome browser. And they set like their first they set their first quarter OKR, like we want 3 million unique users to download our Chrome browser. And they went through this OKR process, and they only got about 750,000. So then they went to the next quarter. They're like, okay, we're going to shoot for 5 million. And a lot of people are like, wait a minute, but we didn't even meet the 3 million. And they're like, doesn't matter, let's shoot for 5. And so then they put in that effort, and the next time they got like 1.5 million unique people. And at the end of that, they took it as, hey, we didn't meet this goal, but I think we learned some things along the way to figure out why we didn't. And then the next time they set their goal for 10 million, which again, like doubled. And at first they're like, what do you mean 10 million? Then they went through the process of what they learned from the previous two quarters. And at the end, they ended up hitting like 13 million. But prior to them using this model, they were looking at it like, oh, we would like 1 million unique users. Like that's what their initial annual goal was. But in 3 quarters, they surpassed that by, more than, 13 times. So using this type of concept really challenges and pushes the individual to make sure that they're really hyper focused on these goals and staying attentive and meeting that. And uh, and the last thing I want to say up here, make sure you're documenting this. Like you don't want to just have like a group conversation with your band or your team to like, yep, we want to do this. You want to make sure you're documenting it in some way. Um, and here is an example of how you can document it. So how I use it with my artists and how I've done it in the past is I use Google Sheets. Um, so most people have Gmail email addresses now. That comes with free access to Google Drive and these tools like Sheets and Slides and stuff like that. And you can share it with other Google users. So I create these in Google Sheets, and also I'll go more into about like templates and guidelines a little bit later. But um, having this makes it easy for other people to go and view and update those tools and those trackers. So here's an example of one that I'm using for a band. They're called Oasis. Here you see in the slogan section, this is actually their vision statement. So Oasis aspires to provide catharsis in sorrow by sharing our own suffering in music and performance to create a sense of connection and not feeling alone to audiences all over the world. Um, Oasis is not your typical band. They're very moody, very broody. In fact, when the singer come to me and he's like, I want to write sad music, and I was challenged like, what do you mean? Like, how do you write a vision statement for that? They did a pretty good job. Um, it, in that having that at the top of your sheet or your tracker also helps make sure that your OKRs and your goals are aligning with your ultimate vision. So in this, there's ways that you can track your progress, but you start with your objective. Here their primary objective is getting music ready for distribution. They're working on an EP and they want to release it. Their key results related to that is have all their songs mixed and mastered within that quarter. Release one single and one video for that single within that quarter, and then also ultimately release an EP and music videos. Um, and then from there, they also assign owners. So, uh, Kane is the singer for this band. He assigns himself a lot, but he has a couple of OKRs within his group that he may assign to other members of the band. You may have one person assigned to a single goal or OKR, but you can assign individual people to different aspects of it. And then below that, in a sheet that I've built, you create initiatives. So this is the actual tactical work that I'm going to do in order to achieve these key results for this objective. And then the other part to making this successful is what I refer to as weekly business meetings. So as Bryan shared earlier, this is a music business. This is not, being in a band, or, being an artist and you're wanting to be successful at this as an independent artist. You have to think of it as a business, not as a hobby. And so with that, being very successful at these things is you should have regular business meetings. And they could be during your band rehearsals, or you can set a time, a dedicated time that you all agree to meet, even if it's for 30 minutes. I strongly recommend it being done weekly, but at bare minimum every 2 weeks. And in that, have it, again, Google has these awesome tools with being able to have a calendar. You can go and set a meeting uh, for all your people. You can do a Google Meet if you want to. I do that very often, or if you want to do it in person, that's fine. but setting a regular meeting on your calendar and on everyone's calendar so it's there. And then make sure you're appointing a facilitator. So, and this could be a rotating role or it could be a single person doing it all the time. But in essence, you're wanting one person to run the meeting and make sure that you're sticking to the agenda. And then you, in these meetings, you pull up your tracker, you pull up your OKRs for that quarter and go, hey, where are we at with this? You go over each of the assigned owners, and the owners go and provide status updates of, hey, I've got, I finished this thing. I haven't been able to finish this. And that's another purpose for the meeting, is to discuss roadblocks. Like, what are things keeping people, the assigned owners, from being able to accomplish their initiatives, and have those group discussions to figure out how to overcome those roadblocks. If they need to talk to somebody, if they, if they need some assistance in doing some of the heavy lifting. Um, and then another thing I highly encourage is find an accountability partner outside of your band or your group. The reason being is, this is somebody that, they have somewhat of a vested interest, but not directly. They're not the ones doing the heavy lifting. They're not the ones doing all of the work, but there's someone that can hold you accountable, that, when you go to this meeting, you're prepared, like, oh, Thomas is going to ask me about where I'm at with this project. I better make sure I'm getting it done. So having an accountability partner, be it a band manager, be it a friend that has that friend within your group that has that strong sense of directness and bluntness, that they're not just like, oh, it's okay, it's fine, we'll get that next week. Find somebody that has the grit to challenge you in an appropriate way, to hold you accountable to how you're progressing within those projects and initiatives. And then at the end of your quarter, you'll want to, again, with your business meeting, you want to review whether or not you met those. You met your OKRs. And again, do not adjust the goal in any way, shape, or fashion. Instead, be very honest with the results on where you did. Make sure you're celebrating the wins. If you crushed a goal, you made it, celebrate it. Pat everybody on the back. Go have a pizza party. But also reflect on those results. There's a lot of times, if you do a true BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal, there's going to be sometimes you're not going to meet those goals. You want to reflect on why. Why did, what was the reason, and be honest. Was it, they ran into a particular roadblock, or was it that someone just wasn't pulling their weight, or they let it slide, or they just didn't pay attention to it. Be honest with yourself on those reasons, and then also reflect on what you learned. Like, hey, you may have been putting in the work and the effort. Like, let's say if we're talking about, the shows, like the show attendance. Let's say, you had a OKR that you wanted to have one sold out show within your hometown, and you have that show and you only had like 50% attendance. And there, you look at what were the things that we did. We worked really hard to get that, but in the end, the outcome didn't make it. What were the reasons? What, did you not put enough in targeting and advertising? Was there aspects of, like, show notifications? Did it not get in front of people's faces, sooner? And really reflect on those reasons why, and then apply that to the next quarter. And again, also, if you run into a situation where you're crushing these goals, you may need to, challenge yourself on, are these big and hairy audacious enough, or is it a little too easy? Not having like a check mark goal, but really challenging to make sure, hey, was this goal a little too easy for us? Let's make it a little bit more challenging in the next quarter. And then set up for the next goal. So, or the next quarter. Even if you're continuing on with the same objectives, but your key results might be bigger. then make sure you're pushing it. Again, kind of like the analogy or the story I gave earlier, you know, their initial key result was they wanted 3 million unique downloads. They only got 750,000. They didn't move the goal below. They didn't keep the goal the same. They moved it further along. They wanted it to be 5 million the next time, and apply what they learned toward that. So do that same method when you are setting your goals for the next quarter. Another suggestion I have as it relates to succeeding in those things is, and I'm sure some of you have probably heard this, anyone that's watched The Secret or, Laws of Attraction, I'm a strong proponent of vision boards. So, when you have your vision statement, create a vision board or something that reflects what that vision statement is. And then I would also encourage it to be a whiteboard next to it where you are putting visuals of where you are within your annual goals or your quarterly goals. Someplace where you are at regularly. So I don't have one right now. I'm in the process of getting a new one, but in my office, I have an area right behind my monitors where I would normally have like a whiteboard, and I would put in like, hey, the goal for this quarter is to, have 500 people in a show attendance. And then, I track and will say, this is where we are right now, and just constantly looking at that keeps it in the front of your mind. This may sound a little woo-woo-ish, but I personally have seen results with stuff like this. Here's kind of my example. So, as I said earlier, I was in a band called Fleischkrieg, and I was one of the driving forces for really trying to push the band to get where we were wanting to go. And I created this graphic where I stole a picture from some concert, and it was like an audience member in the very back of an arena, and it was looking at this band, and I changed the background and the banner of the band to be our banner. And I had that as my wallpaper on my computer for at least 2 years. This is what it looked like. So I literally replaced it with my band's banner, and I looked at that every day for a solid 2 years. And then prior to me leaving Fleischkrieg, this is a picture from our last show. So yes, it's not the arena, but the last show I played with them, we played to a sold out show in Cleveland, Ohio for over 2,200 people. And I genuinely attribute that to me constantly looking at that vision of what we were trying to do and trying to accomplish, and pushing the band to do these things related to these tools and processes that I've shared with you. So that is it on that side of it. So if you need help with your strategy, or you have more detailed questions that, related to helping building your vision statement, building your strategy, building your goals, your OKRs, you can reach me at darkstreammusicmanagement.com or info@darkstreammusicmanagement.com. And then also for our Independent Musicians Guild, we for paid members of the Independent Musicians Guild, I offer free strategy sessions. So once you become a paid member, you can go into our resource directory, and there's a way to contact me that will alert me that says, hey, this is a gold member, this is a platinum member within the group, and we schedule some time, and we'll work to help build your strategy, help build your vision statement, and help you set your annual goals and your first OKRs. Also, we are giving access to all of the worksheets and templates that I use. I'm building the page right now, but all paid members will have access to the template I use for building a vision, template used to identify those milestones and work backwards, and helping set those goals, access to the template Excel or the Google Sheet that I was sharing an example of earlier, as well as some other things like how to write a bio, how to design a website, a few things like that. Um, and paid members will get free access to those documents. And then also in addition to that, for gold members, I offer 10% off of services, and for platinum members, 20% off of services. So if you go into the strategy session and you want to work further, you need some assistance with some of the other things that I do related to strategy. You need that accountability partner. You need to have weekly meetings, touch bases, consultations. For IMG paid members, I give a discount off of those services. Um, and yeah, that is it. Thank you very much. And Brian, I'm going to kick it back over to you. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Let's go take a look. Let's see here. So none directly. I will ask a couple that I have just to kind of see what people are thinking, what I'm thinking at least, and then give other people a chance. So I guess when you're talking through OKR's goals, my first impression is, okay, that seems obviously as a business professional, like you're going to see that in Amazon, you're going to see it in companies. My day job, we use OKRs, and it's something that we definitely leverage. But I feel like for a lot of musicians, where they're tattoo artists, or they're airmen, or they're a construction worker, or they're a waiter, like musicians don't tend to be in jobs that are 9 to 5, right? Musicians are oftentimes creative. They need their time so they can have their evenings. They may work in the mornings. So talk to me about like how you approach musicians that just have never really approached like a business process, business administration, side of this. Because this is a hard concept sometimes for people who are in a 9 to 5, tech job, let alone someone who day trades as a waiter. You know what I mean? So talk to me about like how that methodology is going to break down, and then how do you disseminate that into a group of 5 people who are all kind of from different backgrounds and different experience levels?
Yeah, so I would say, so first and foremost is find time for it. So dedicate, once a week, you block off a certain amount of time that you can say, no matter what the schedule is or whatever, block off a certain amount of time each week to sit down and focus on those things. And even if you're not as tech savvy from like say, um, from like a Google perspective or using these sheets and trackers, I think write it down, like write it in a notebook. Have something with you. Like I would presume most artists, especially lyricists, have a notebook that they're writing in. I'm sure they're not like coming up with the lyrics and just memorize them, but have a notebook and use these same methods, but using it in a notebook fashion. The other thing that I would say, like with a larger group, is there should be somebody within that group that we'll sometimes refer to it as right brain, left brain. There should be somebody that has some level of left brain acumen that says, and have them be like the main driver, the facilitator, and do that to help with. So like even with so this band Oasis, uh, most of them are creatives, or they've got these other jobs and stuff like that. They can record like nobody's business, but or they can write music, but they're not really into this. And what I found was, their singer, he is definitely the driving force, and he has a certain level of like there's aspects that he's doing within his band where he's going and researching how to do music videos, how to do video editing, how to do marketing. Like he was the driving force trying to do those things. So I would work through him and say, all right, like you're going to be the main representative, the liaison with the rest of the group, but have him, and they don't get on Zoom calls. I get on a Zoom call or with the singer, but they have a dedicated time every week for their rehearsals, and they spend a certain amount of that time talking about band business and so on. So he basically is that liaison that formats it in a easily consumable way with the larger group. So that would be my suggestions.
And you mentioned band business. Let's just kind
Yeah.
of get it out of the way. Like, a lot of bands don't approach this as a business. So like when you're having this conversation about vision and goals, like I
Hmm.
think the mindset of looking at a business or your band as a business, do you have the ability to, pay taxes when you guys play gigs and you're actually getting money? Are you as a band, do you have a band fund? Do you have do you have a PayPal account where all your band fund gets deposited? And then when you guys have shows, that is going into the band fund to fund things like vinyl records or producing fees or artist fees that
Marketing.
you're having. Marketing. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. There's a lot of artists that I've worked with that don't recognize that they'll put $1,000 into a music video and they won't budget anything for marketing to actually get it seen. They'll budget $3,000 for an album and they'll budget nothing for promotion or PR. And it's just like, you have to look at the bigger picture of this. Like, as a business, you are either going to, trudge out content organically and try to get that seen by anybody and everybody, or you're going to have to pay to play. And unfortunately, Facebook does not have a very friendly, organic reach anymore.
Hmm.
There's no MySpace, where
Yeah.
musicians really ruled. Like, you could build a following on MySpace, like back in the Black Veil Bride days. Like, you could build a following
In
on
this
MySpace.
moment.
And this moment was all over that, right? That's how they grew. But you don't really find bands that are like Facebook bands anymore. I mean, I think if anything, TikTok is probably the closest as far as like music friendly. But TikTok has really rough, rules when it comes to licensing and using your music in your videos. And if you have a business account on TikTok, good luck. All you can do is put like boilerplate generic video, music in your content, or otherwise it gets blocked. So you can't even really run your TikTok as a business. So I say that to ask you the question, how do you usually coach people to get into a business mentality when they're looking at their band and they're used to get together every Saturday and having a beer, but they still want to be successful? How do you work with people to change that mindset?
So I generally use literally like the vision statement and strategy sessions with the artists that I talk with. Um, so I get to be that objective third party that, I don't have as much vested interest in what they're doing as they do. Like, this is their art, their passion. Not to say that, oh, they're just another band. It's not like that, but I'm not that band. I'm not the one forming. I'm not the one that feels everything involved with that art and what they're doing. And I personally, I challenge them. And first and foremost, like when I interview and consult with a new artist, when they reach out to me, the first thing I ask them is like, okay, who's your members? What type of member are they? Are they a hired gun? Are they part of the band? And I help them see through that and those aspects, and I also help them. I challenge them to think like, is this a hobby or is this a business? And you know, being able to have those tough conversations, those tough realizations, there's been a couple of artists I worked with that are like, oh, we're a five-piece band, everybody is equal members. We got, I was like, okay. And then I did look under the hood. I find out it's one or two people doing all the work, and the rest, the other two to three are just kind of like they're there. They'll record something, they'll put something, but they're not doing as much effort. And I'll go and ask them like, okay, are you sure that you're wanting this split equally five ways? And then I help them like think about again like with that vision statement. I help guide them in those strategies. But I also challenge them to then sit down and go, what does this business look like?
Yeah.
Who is getting, so when you do, when you submit for a business, like you have to specify who are the members, what are their roles, what is the percentages, and and document that, and everyone agree to it. Because the other aspect that a lot of people don't realize or don't use or practice is when you write and record a song, there is a thing called split sheets where
Yep.
as soon as the song is written, and even if it's just a rough demo, is recorded, at the end of that, you should have this piece of paper that goes, okay, I wrote this percentage of the song, you wrote that percentage of the song, I wrote this percentage of the lyrics, and you write down and document that, and everyone agree and sign it. Because a lot of people will have those verbal agreements. I've had those verbal agreements with people as well, and trusted them. And then later on down the road, these songs that I had written, they go, either I left the band or, it was a little bit in transition. That person who was the administrator went and uploaded and gave themselves everything. And
Yep.
we didn't have anything to document to say, hey, this is here. So you want to have those discussions and understanding and be very truthful with yourself. Is this a business or is it a hobby? And if
Right.
it's a business, you need to treat it as such. If it's a hobby, and it's fine either way, but the
Yeah.
people that are in your band that aren't in alignment, you need to have that discussion of like, is this something you could change to, or even change their part of the role. So like one of the artists that I talked with, they were having some issues with one of the members in the band, and they contributed. They'd written some songs, but some other people had written other parts, and they weren't as jazzed to be to play those songs or whatever the case may be. And they kind of started getting back, and ultimately had to have a discussion like, look, here are your options. We can either agree that this is not for you, we go ahead and part ways. You'll still receive whatever from your contributions, but you're no longer part of the band. Or we bring you on strictly as a hired gun. That we do we've run all the administrative, all the business decisions, all the strategic decisions. You just show up for the photo shoots, the music videos, and the shows, and you'll get paid a flat fee for those services. Or you can go all in and you can come in and like get to our side of the fence and contribute and go from there. And just having those difficult conversations and understand that also in business, even if you're in a business with friends, you have to have that documented and you have to have that agreement. And if there's friction, be honest
Mm-hmm.
with each other and say, hey, for the sake of our friendship, and also the ultimate vision of what we're trying to do with this, it's probably best that we part ways.
Yeah. We had an artist that I worked with as a drummer with him in his project, and he was telling us kind of a horror story about how he was really happy that he was only a hired gun for this project, even though he really thought he was going to be like a long-standing member. But the people who kind of own the project were pretty protective of that ownership rights. At the time, he was like, I feel like I've done more and I should have ownership. And there was a sentiment there of kind of, pessimism. But he realized that they signed a record deal and they signed a deal that was bad, really bad. So he got to walk away and not have to deal with the debt that record label had put on those two people who were the owners of a 5-person band. Because those two people were the owners of the band, other people were participants, right? They were artists that were basically hired guns, right? They weren't necessarily people who, had any ownership rights to the band. You can have ownership rights to a song without ownership rights to the band. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't want to discuss or don't want to like have the conversation from a business standpoint. But like, I kind of think about it like this, like if one of the two bands that I was in, right, got $1 million contract tomorrow, how would we split the money? Would you split it based on effort? Would you split it based on who's putting all the work in, right? If you have a guy who comes in and does the show and he doesn't practice and he doesn't write, he doesn't contribute, he just, basically comes in, like, does that person get a part of that $1 million bonus, or are they becoming someone who you're going to use part of that $1 million out of your cut to pay them as a hired gun, right? If that's the situation, you kind of need to think about that ahead, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're like making progress and you get an offer for $1 million deal and you are now committed and bro's like, hey man, I can't go on tour because I got my job at Chili's.
Yep.
So we're gonna punch you into $1 million contract, but you can't even go on tour.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't fulfill the rights of the band. You can't fulfill the actual needs, right? That's a very different conversation, a very difficult conversation. And, that band debt, that how much are you actually How much do you owe back to the record label, right? It's something a lot of people don't think about. And so I think for me, like when you dig into these conversations, that's why like when you get into a band, for me personally, when I join a band, it is toxicity aside, right? Like there's no drug use. There is no like extreme alcoholism. There is no toxic personality traits that I don't want to deal with, because if I get $1 million contract because of the work that we're doing, do I want to share it with someone who shows up high every single practice, doesn't contribute, can't make it on tour, doesn't sleep through gigs? Like, is that someone you want to share that pot with? You know what I mean? Because it's equal rights. It's either you're the owner or you're one of the artists. And if you're a 5-way ownership team, I'm not sure anybody who's tried to be married to 5 different people, but it's not easy.
Right. Exactly. And
Right?
also, like, to that point, if you find yourself struggling to even have those discussions, or you're afraid, or you need to, then that's an indicator that you're not in it for the business, you're in it for the fun.
Hobby.
And it's a hobby. It's not a
Yep.
business. Unless you have the grit to have those hard conversations and really like, because like you said, if they fall into, even if they do as well as they do organically, when they come to a point where they get offered $1 million deal, or they get offered a ridiculous opportunity, it will fall apart if there isn't that structure in place and those agreements in place to begin with. And a lot of times, like, I don't have direct label, experience. I've never been offered a record deal, but I know people who have, and I've also witnessed a lot of things, and all the ones that I know personally that have gotten deals and have been successful were the people that had that business mindset. They had those agreements. They understood who were hired guns versus the owners, and doing that. And all the ones where it wasn't, they fell apart and they went into debt. They didn't, or they ended up not following through, and you never heard of them. And then everyone also, in the end, it kind of makes the band implode. Like, they come up with this great opportunity, have some agreements that wasn't set forth in the beginning, and it all falls apart, and a bunch of people's time was wasted.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man, we are at 53 minutes. We are digging deep into this. Any last minute advice for anybody? Obviously, go join the IMG. We are trying to build a community of independent musicians who are trying to grow, who want to understand how to take their career to the next level, who want to understand how to market, how to put themselves in a business mindset, how to get their art in front of people, how to play gigs. We got a lot of really cool stuff happening. We're trying to build a great audience of people. One of our long, big, audacious goals, our BHAGs for ourselves, is to be able to help people get insurance. We want to be able to, almost like a union, be able to help put together a large list of users to be able to bring to an insurance agency and say, hey, we want to make sure we're getting health insurance, medical insurance, financial advisors to be able to help musicians, which, as Chaperone, said at the Grammys, is a big issue. Record labels don't support their artists as W-2 employees. They're 1099, and 1099, you have to have insurance. So, as a business owner myself, I have multiple companies. I can tell you, it's important to recognize where you want to get support, where you want to have help, where you want to network. And we're trying to build something where you can lean on the team and lean on your support group to be able to do things like book gigs, get recording sessions done, try to get in front of different labels, trying to get in front of advertisers who will be willing to sponsor a bus for you, trying to get in front of different advertisers for discounts. So join the team. We want to make sure that you are getting every opportunity you can, and we want to be here to help with that.
Yep. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining. We appreciate it, and we'll see you on our next event.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.